The day starts with a strange silence inside the little roadside diner, the kind of silence that hints something important is about to break, and that feeling becomes even stronger when a man who looks like he barely belongs there pushes the door open and walks in wearing a simple grey hoodie pulled low over his brow, even though his shoes and posture quietly betray the weight of another world. This moment connects straight to the idea behind Billionaire orders the cheapest meal. Polite Waitress'S response exposes an empire-level secret because the man choosing the smallest item on the menu is someone who clearly could buy the entire place with a single phone call. Ethan takes his seat near the window and speaks softly when the waitress approaches, ordering nothing more than the cheapest meal on the menu, as if the whole point is to stay unnoticed. She looks at him with tired kindness, the kind that grows from long shifts and little thanks, and there is something in her gaze that makes Ethan study her more closely, as though she carries a story he hasn't heard before. Around them, the atmosphere feels heavy, as if the staff is afraid of being watched, afraid of making the smallest mistake. That tension pushes a quiet promise into the air, a promise that something far bigger than a simple lunch is unfolding. Under the surface of Ethan's calm expression, two questions begin to rise for anyone observing him. Why would a billionaire choose to disappear inside a place like this? And what truth is he trying so hard to uncover without saying a single word? Ethan sits there with the cheap plate in front of him, barely touching the fries as he watches the workers around the room move like people carrying invisible weight. He knows that weight far too well, because he was the one who created the policy that keeps them all walking on eggshells. When he introduced the rule of no free meals under any circumstances, he believed he was protecting his business from being taken advantage of. But as letters from employees started coming in, stories of how strict managers were becoming, he feared he had built something harsh without noticing how deeply it cut the human side of his empire. Sitting there now with the hum of the kitchen behind him and the soft clinking of glasses filling the background, he sees how his presence blends perfectly into the world of the workers, because at this moment he is sharing their silence, their tension, their sense of being watched by rules that don't understand people. Mia, the young waitress moving between tables, catches his attention more than once. Not because she tries to stand out, but because she moves gently even while carrying the pressure of the rule he created. He notices how she greets customers with a soft smile, even though her eyes show the exhaustion of someone who has had to choose between kindness and consequences too many times. Her uneasiness stirs something in him, making him wonder if stepping into the day-to-day life of his employees will reveal more than any report ever could, and whether blending into this tiny diner might open his eyes to the damage hidden beneath the surface of his polished empire. Just as Ethan begins to settle into the rhythm of the diner, a shadow crosses the window beside him, slow and hesitant, and when he turns his head he sees the outline of a homeless man peering through the glass with hunger and shame mixed on his face. The sight pulls Mia's attention too, and in that tiny moment her expression changes in a way that Ethan instantly recognizes: kindness fighting fear. She looks toward the manager's office door, closed tight as always, the same door that holds the authority to punish anyone who breaks the rule Ethan wrote from a boardroom far away. The homeless man doesn't step inside, choosing instead to stay outside where the cold air and his pride keep him from asking for something as simple as warm food. Ethan observes everything quietly, realizing that this single moment reflects the true cost of the rule he believed would help his company run smoothly. He feels a knot tighten in his chest because for the first time, the consequences of his decisions are no longer numbers, charts, or summaries presented by executives. They're a man shivering outside a window and a waitress torn between orders and compassion. The conflict becomes clear in Ethan's mind, and it grows even sharper when he senses that Mia is wrestling with a choice that might affect her job, her dignity, and even her safety in this workplace. It creates a question inside him that lingers like a warning. What happens when a good person is forced to choose between following a rule and saving someone's spirit? The minutes stretch slowly as Ethan watches the tension building inside Mia, her eyes flicking from the homeless man to the office door again and again, as though each glance is a request for permission that will never come. Her breath catches once or twice, barely noticeable, yet it speaks volumes about the fear of slipping out of line. Ethan feels the weight of his own unfinished fries, sitting there as a quiet symbol of waste beside someone who clearly needs them more than he ever will. He doesn't say anything, not because he agrees with the rule, but because he wants to understand the truth revealed when no one knows the owner is watching. His silence becomes part of the pressure, part of the test he didn't fully intend to create, and the guilt settles deeper as he realizes that every second Mia hesitates is a second shaped by his decisions. The diner's low conversations fade beneath the sound of Mia's careful steps and the heavy air of uncertainty. Ethan understands now that the situation is reaching a point where something must happen, and whether the rule stands or falls will depend on a choice Mia makes from the heart rather than from fear. That knowledge pushes another hard question forward, one that hangs in the air like a storm cloud. When the moment breaks, who will pay the price for doing the right thing? When Mia finally makes her move, it is almost silent, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to change the entire course of the day. She waits until customers look away, and then gently gathers some of Ethan's untouched fries, placing them inside a small takeout box with hands that tremble only slightly. Ethan watches without interfering, watching the full truth of his own rule unravel in front of him. Mia steps outside into the chilly air, the box held close as if she's protecting something fragile. She walks toward the homeless man and gives the food to him with a soft whisper, saying the words she hopes will shield her from punishment. A customer didn't want these. The man accepts it with a gratitude so pure it almost hurts Ethan to witness, and at that moment, Ethan feels a shock inside him that mixes admiration and guilt in equal measure. She broke his rule, but she did it to protect someone who had nothing left. That act becomes the turning point for Ethan, a decision with no way back, a moment that reveals exactly how far compassion will go even when the system tries to crush it. The question rising inside him becomes impossible to ignore now, pushing the story forward with sharp urgency. After seeing her break the rule for the sake of humanity, what will he do next? Expose her, defend her, or change everything? Before we move forward, take a second and pause the video to tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you've ever seen someone make a brave choice like Mia did. Seriously, pause now and write it, because your comment helps this story reach more people, and it connects you with everyone feeling this moment right now. Ethan stayed seated for a while after Mia stepped back inside, letting the door close behind her, as the homeless man held the small box like it was something precious. The fries on Ethan's own plate were still warm, untouched, just as she'd said, and that detail pushed him to stand up gently and walk toward the counter, where she was wiping her hands on her apron. He didn't want to startle her, so he kept his voice soft when he asked how long she had worked there. Mia blinked, surprised he wanted conversation, but she answered politely, explaining she'd been there a couple of years and that she liked the customers even when the rules made things hard. Ethan nodded slowly, trying to sound casual, as he asked whether the man outside came by often. Mia's shoulders lowered a little, as if being asked that question allowed her to breathe. She said he did, that he never begged, never caused trouble, only stood by the window some days hoping for warmth more than food. She added that sometimes dignity mattered more than rules, and she said it in such a quiet, honest way that Ethan felt something shift inside him, like her words scraped against a truth he had ignored for too long. He noticed she didn't explain herself with fear, nor did she apologize for what she'd done. Her eyes held a steady calm, the kind that belonged to someone who knew she had made the right choice, even if the consequences might hurt. That calm shook Ethan more than he expected. He'd spent years believing that rules held the world together, that keeping order meant keeping fairness. But the way she spoke made him realize fairness wasn't always found in the lines he had drawn. She didn't brag about helping the man, or try to justify her decision. She simply said that people deserved to feel human, even when they had nothing left. Ethan watched her for a second, noticing how her hands trembled only after the conversation ended, like the courage had come first, and the fear was catching up now. He felt admiration tighten his chest, mixed with a heavy shame that made his throat feel thick. She wasn't the one who should feel nervous. He was. She was the one doing the job with a heart he had accidentally pushed into a corner. She turned away to refill coffee for an older couple, and Ethan realized she hadn't even considered regretting her choice. Not once, not even in the face of what might happen to her next. That struck him harder than any financial report ever had. Ethan leaned on the counter for a moment as the air in the diner shifted around him. It felt different now that he'd heard her speak about dignity in a place where rules had started to overshadow the people following them. He watched her smile at a customer, then exhale quietly when she thought no one saw. Each little detail painted a clearer picture of what his policy had done, not just to her but to everyone trapped between compassion and consequences. He wondered if she had ever been punished for small kindnesses before, or if today was the first time she had crossed the line because she couldn't stomach watching someone fall apart outside the door. The guilt worked deeper into him, but so did a strange relief because her courage gave him clarity he hadn't felt in years. That clarity made a question begin to take shape in his mind, a question that would determine everything that happened next. As Ethan moved back to his table, he realized he couldn't walk away from this without understanding her heart more completely. He sensed something else beneath her words, something unspoken, maybe a history of moments where she had seen struggle up close, and learned that kindness sometimes had to be quiet to survive. When she returned to his table to ask if he needed anything else, he met her gaze with a sincerity he rarely showed anyone. He thanked her in a soft tone, not for the service, but for how she treated people. She gave a tiny, confused smile, not knowing the weight behind his gratitude. He could feel himself reaching a point where he'd have to decide whether to reveal the truth or keep watching, to understand even more about the world his policies had shaped. And that decision hovered right over him, waiting, pulling him toward a path he wasn't sure he was ready to walk. By the time Mia stepped away to help another table, Ethan felt the questions settle fully inside his chest, heavy but clear. She didn't regret giving the food. She didn't fear the choice she made. She feared what the rule might cost her, yet she still chose kindness anyway. That realization created a kind of crossroads for him, quiet but electrifying. Continuing the test would show him even more about the culture he had built, but revealing himself now could protect her from the storm beginning to gather around her actions. He wasn't sure which direction would teach him the truth he needed most, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever he chose next would decide not just her fate, but the fate of every worker living under a system he had created from a distance. Ethan stayed near the counter a little longer, watching Mia try to shake off the nerves that still clung to her after helping the man outside. When the rush slowed and only a couple of customers remained, she came by to refill his water, and he gently asked if she ever had days that felt heavier than others following the rules here. She hesitated, then gave a small laugh that didn't hide the sadness underneath, saying the rules weren't bad by themselves, but sometimes they trapped good people in bad moments. When Ethan encouraged her with a quiet nod, she told him about a winter evening last year, when an older woman came in soaked from the rain, shaking from the cold. Mia wasn't allowed to give her soup without payment, and the manager had been watching closely. She brought the woman hot water instead, and kept checking on her until someone from town recognized her and paid for her meal. Mia said she never forgot the look in that woman's eyes, the mix of embarrassment and relief, and she spoke about it now like it still tasted bitter inside her. Ethan listened without interrupting, feeling every detail of her story sink deeper into his chest, showing him how much humanity had been pushed aside by a rule he never meant to turn into a barrier. She kept talking, only after he asked if things like that happened often. Mia admitted they did, not every day, but often enough that she learned to read people within seconds, and sometimes a simple act of kindness could soften someone's entire world. She wasn't trying to impress him. Her voice stayed steady, ordinary, honest, like she didn't expect praise for caring. She said she didn't want to live in a world where she ignored people who clearly needed help just because a handbook told her to. Ethan felt a tight pull in his heart, not because her words were dramatic, but because they were simple truths that echoed things he had forgotten along the way. For years he believed the strict rules kept everything fair, but now he saw how the system became a wall that kept compassion on the other side. Mia looked down at her hands then, and for a moment she admitted she did worry about her job, but she was more afraid of waking up one day and realizing she had become cold-hearted. That single confession settled over the table like a hush, the kind that makes someone rethink everything they once believed. And at that silence, it feels like anyone listening might remember a moment when kindness cost something, when rules felt too tight, or when someone chose empathy anyway. It brings a sense that we all have stood somewhere between fear and compassion, and hearing Mia say it out loud makes the story feel shared, like everyone following along knows exactly what that crossroads feels like. Mia lifted her eyes again, smiling a little, as if embarrassed for speaking so openly, but Ethan assured her gently that he appreciated her honesty. He felt something warm loosen inside him, a kind of respect he didn't give lightly. He told her she had handled the situation outside with more heart than many leaders he had met, and she shrugged softly, saying she just hoped the man felt seen. She didn't know it, but those words cut right through Ethan's thoughts, because he built an empire without realizing how invisible people could become inside it. He felt the start of an apology rise, though he didn't speak it yet, choosing instead to watch how she carried herself with a grace he had not expected. So it stirred in him an understanding he could no longer ignore, something heavy shifting toward a new shape. As another customer called for her, Mia excused herself, leaving Ethan alone with the echo of her stories. He realized he stood at another turning point. She wasn't warning him. She wasn't asking for anything. She simply shared what she believed was right. That honesty unsettled him, not with discomfort, but with awakening. The path ahead grew sharper. He could keep watching or finally step into the truth and take responsibility. But which choice would protect her? Which one would fix what he had broken? That question moved with him like a shadow, hinting that whatever came next would reshape both their lives, and nothing felt fully decided yet. Ethan stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the conversation with Mia settle in his mind like a weight that kept shifting, revealing new layers every time he examined it. When he finally stood and walked back toward the window, he watched her working the room with the same gentle care she'd shown earlier. But now he saw the strain behind her smile with sharper clarity. It wasn't just tiredness. It was the effort of someone who tried to stay warm in a system that kept turning colder. He thought back to the years he'd spent in boardrooms, surrounded by people who spoke only in numbers and charts, each decision trimmed into something clean and efficient. He remembered the pressure to tighten costs, the warnings about franchises being taken advantage of, the way he'd convinced himself that rules would keep everything fair. But fairness had slipped through those rules like water through tight fingers, leaving something rigid and unforgiving in its place. Watching Mia refill a coffee cup for an older man who clearly couldn't tip much, Ethan felt a truth rise inside him that he had tried to ignore for too long. He had built a structure that protected profits, but sometimes harmed the people who held that structure up, and now he could see the emotional cost etched into Mia's face, cost she tried every day to hide from managers who saw only policy violations instead of human struggle. Her earlier words replayed in his mind, about dignity being more important than rules, and he felt something crack through the armor he had worn since the first day he signed those policies into place. He imagined the shareholders in their suits, talking about discipline and order, and he felt almost sick realizing how easy it had been to forget the people standing on the other end of their decisions. Mia's stories revealed what the reports never showed, how employees carried guilt when they couldn't help someone, how they learned to shut down parts of themselves just to keep their jobs. Ethan watched her move from table to table with a kind of tenderness that had no place in a rulebook, and the shame pressed harder in his chest as he accepted that she had shown him more truth in one afternoon than his executives had shown in years. He needed to act, that much was clear, but he also knew rushing forward without understanding the whole situation might make things worse for her. So he stayed quiet, observing, piecing together how deeply the system he built had shaped this place, and how easily kindness could become a risk. Moments like this shift everything, even if it isn't obvious yet, because choices made under quiet pressure always circle back, and what Ethan decides now will echo through more than just this diner. As the lunch crowd thinned, Mia finally leaned against the counter for a moment, giving Ethan a chance to speak softly without drawing attention. He thanked her again, not for the service, but for how she treated people, and this time he let a bit of his regret slip into his voice. She looked at him carefully as though trying to read the deeper meaning behind his words. She didn't ask why he cared so much, but she did offer another small truth. Helping others made her feel like herself, even though the rules sometimes made her feel wrong for caring. That confession stirred something warm in Ethan, something grateful, and he told her she shouldn't lose that part of herself. She gave a short smile, quiet but real, and he realized she was beginning to trust him, even if she had no idea who he truly was. That trust made him want to protect her even more, especially from the consequences that he feared were coming. He felt a decision form inside him with a firmness he hadn't expected. He would intervene to shield her from any fallout, but he couldn't reveal his identity yet, not until he understood exactly how deep the problem went. When she moved away again to wipe down a booth, Ethan followed her with his eyes, thinking about everything that had led him to this moment. He knew now that standing by wasn't an option, not after seeing how the rules twisted the lives of people who were only trying to stay kind in a world that often punished compassion. But stepping in too soon could bring chaos, confusion, and fear, especially if people learned the owner was watching. So he held the decision close, waiting for the right moment, knowing that whatever time he had left before the truth surfaced was running thin. And beneath that quiet tension, a new question grew stronger by the second, pulling the story toward what came next. How could he protect her without exposing everything he had built and everything he was about to change? Rick stepped out of his office with a tension in his steps that shifted the whole mood of the diner, the kind of tension that made conversations lower and shoulders tighten without anyone saying a word. Ethan noticed it right away. He had been quietly watching Mia clean off a table, her movements soft but slower than before, like she could feel something coming, even if she couldn't name it yet. The bell on the door jingled faintly as a cold breeze swept in, carrying the sound of traffic from the highway outside, and Rick's eyes landed on the window where the homeless man still sat on the curb with the small takeout box resting in his hands. His expression sharpened, not with empathy but with suspicion, and he marched toward the counter with a firmness that made Mia's hand freeze mid-wipe. Ethan felt his pulse rise because the look on Rick's face was the kind of look he had seen in board meetings when managers smelled rule-breaking. It was the look of someone ready to find blame, not answers. Rick asked abruptly if any food was missing and if anyone had seen something unusual. The kitchen staff shook their heads quickly, avoiding eye contact, while Mia swallowed hard and forced herself to keep wiping the table, even though her fingers trembled. Ethan could see the way she tried to hide her breathing, calm her face and pretend she was unaffected, but her eyes flickered toward the window, giving away everything she was trying to disguise. Rick followed her gaze, saw the homeless man lift the lid of the box, and the suspicion in his expression darkened. Ethan felt something heavy press against his chest because he knew exactly what was coming, exactly how this would be interpreted by a man who lived by hard rules and harsher assumptions. Rick called Mia over, and she moved toward him with slow steps, each one sounding heavier than the last. Ethan caught the small glance she threw his way, a silent wish for strength or maybe a warning to stay quiet. Her voice sounded steady when she answered Rick's questions, but her shoulders were tight and she kept her hands clasped together to stop them from shaking. Rick asked why a homeless man outside had a company takeout box, and the room seemed to shrink with the pressure of the question. Ethan stood from his seat a little, just enough to be ready if he needed to intervene, but not enough to draw attention. He watched Mia's face as she tried to come up with a reason that wouldn't put anyone else at risk. She said she didn't know for sure, that maybe another customer had handed it off on their way out, her eyes darting just for a second to Ethan's plate. Rick didn't buy it. He crossed his arms, narrowed his eyes, and said someone must have broken the rule. The silence that followed felt thick, stretching across the diner like a rubber band pulled too tight. Ethan felt the weight of every past decision pressing down on him, all the rules he had written from a distance, without thinking about moments like this. Mia looked down at the floor, trying to stay calm, but her voice wavered when she insisted she didn't give out free meals. Rick wasn't satisfied. He said there was only one way to settle it. He'd checked the cameras. The words hit the air like a hammer, and Ethan felt himself inhale sharply, ready for the moment to crack open. Mia's face lost a hint of color, not because she regretted what she had done, but because she knew the truth would come out and the punishment would fall only on her. Ethan could see the fear she tried to swallow, but he could also see the courage underneath it, still standing even when everything around her began to tilt. As Rick turned toward the office again, Mia's eyes lifted slightly, landing on Ethan with a softness that carried a mix of apology, bravery, and something like acceptance. Ethan realized that no matter how hard she tried, the rule was going to crush her unless he stepped in. He felt the decision rise inside him with a new sharpness, a certainty that waiting much longer would mean watching someone lose her job because of his policy, but rushing in would blow his cover before he understood how deep the problems went. One path protected her now, the other protected her later. Both were dangerous, both mattered. And as Rick's hand touched the office door, Ethan felt the moment tightening around him like a closing fist, leaving him with only one thought that carried the weight of everything that came before. The next seconds could change everything for her, for him, and for an entire system built on rules that had forgotten the people who lived under them. Ethan stepped away from the counter the moment Rick disappeared into his office, needing a breath that didn't taste like fear. He walked toward the far end of the diner where the lights were dimmer, where he could watch Mia without making her feel exposed. His heart felt heavy in a way he hadn't expected when he first stepped inside, pretending to be just another traveler. Now every second showed him more clearly how his own rules had shaped this moment, how the fear sitting in Mia's shoulders came directly from decisions he once believed were harmless business moves. The hum of the old ceiling fan, the clatter of dishes in the sink, the soft scrape of Mia's shoes on the floor, everything blended into a reminder that this place ran on human effort, not policy manuals, and that human effort was trembling right now because of him. He imagined Rick sitting in his office loading up the camera feed, replaying the exact moment Mia stepped outside with that box, and the thought twisted something sharp inside Ethan. His responsibility was no longer something distant. It was a real woman with real consequences hanging over her head. He watched her for a few seconds as she took a slow breath and tried to continue working, even though the dread was almost visible in the way she held her hands close to her chest. She didn't regret helping the man, and he knew she never would, but she also knew what came next. He thought about all the times he had listened to executives insisting that strict policies kept the business safe, how he had nodded along without considering the weight placed on people who had to enforce them. He remembered long nights in conference rooms, hearing warnings about waste, about abuse, about margins shrinking, and he had agreed to tighten rules believing it would protect everyone. But he had forgotten something simple and important. The rules didn't just stop abuse. They also punished kindness. Watching Mia stand in the middle of the room with fear pressing into her ribs, he felt the full force of that truth hit him like a blow. She was the proof that his rule had gone too far, and now she was standing alone at the edge of losing her job because of a man outside who needed a meal, and because of another man inside who had forgotten what compassion looked like. He tried to steady himself, reminding his breath to stay calm. Revealing who he was right now would create chaos. The other workers would panic, Rick would scramble, and Mia might feel overwhelmed in a moment when she needed clarity, not confusion. But staying silent meant letting the cameras expose her. He imagined Rick walking back out with that cold expression he always used, announcing in front of the staff that Mia broke the rule. He imagined the fear in her eyes, the humiliation, the way her kindness would be twisted into wrongdoing. That image settled so heavily inside him that he knew waiting much longer wasn't an option. He had to step in, but the way he stepped in would determine everything. His emotions tangled inside him, shame, regret, determination, until they finally shaped themselves into a decision he couldn't ignore anymore. He would tell Mia the truth, not the whole diner, not Rick, just her. She deserved to know who she had stood up against and who she had unknowingly taught something powerful today. He watched her stand by the window, her eyes drifting toward the curb where the homeless man still ate slowly, savoring every bite like a treasure. There was something in the way she watched him, a quiet relief that she managed to help him, even if it cost her dearly. That made Ethan realize why this moment mattered so much. He couldn't let the system swallow her for showing the very humanity he wished more people had. His steps carried him closer to her, each one feeling heavier than the last as he rehearsed what he would say. He didn't even know how to begin. He just knew that once he spoke the truth, everything would shift, and the world she thought she worked in would no longer look the same. Mia turned slightly, sensing him behind her, offering a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. The sadness in that smile tightened something inside him until it almost hurt, and it made the decision rise to the surface with absolute certainty. Moments like this make anyone stop and think. Should kindness cost a person their job? Would you have done what Mia did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if these stories make you reflect the way Ethan is reflecting now, stay with us and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because the next steps will change everything for these characters. Ethan lowered his voice as he approached her, telling her he needed to talk privately before Rick came back. She looked confused, but something in his tone made her nod. As he prepared to speak the truth he had kept hidden since the moment he walked in, he felt the weight of his entire empire settle on his shoulders and a quiet hope rise that maybe, just maybe, showing her who he really was, could fix the damage before it broke her future. The picture of her standing alone in that tiny diner became a promise in his mind, a promise that things would not end here, not like this, not for someone who chose compassion over fear. And with that thought anchoring him, he finally opened his mouth to say the words that would shift both their lives forever. Ethan stepped closer to Mia, lowering his voice as he told her they needed to talk outside, away from the noise of the diner and the tension building behind Rick's office door. She looked startled at first, unsure why a stranger would want a private word in such a charged moment, but something in his eyes made her nod. She followed him out to the side of the building, where the afternoon light softened and the hum of cars rolling by on the highway filled the silence between them. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Mia hugged her arms to her chest, not from the cold but from the weight of everything happening at once. Ethan watched her, trying to steady his breath, trying to gather the right words to reveal the truth without breaking her trust. He finally said her name gently, and that small sound made her lift her eyes to his. Her expression carried confusion and a fragile fear, the kind that comes when a person knows a moment is bigger than they're ready for. Ethan forced himself to meet her gaze fully, before telling her he wasn't just a customer passing through. He wasn't a traveler on the road. He wasn't anyone ordinary. He told her his full name, the one she had seen printed on company memos and policy binders, the one spoken in meetings by managers with the kind of respect that came from fear. The moment the name left his mouth, her whole face went still, as if her mind couldn't connect the man in front of her with the name she had heard whispered in break rooms. Mia stepped back slightly, her hand rising halfway to her mouth before she stopped it. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, as if she expected he might be joking or testing her, or trying to trick her into saying something she shouldn't. When she realized he wasn't joking, the fear inside her shifted into something sharper and more overwhelming. She whispered his name again, almost apologizing just for saying it out loud. She asked why he was there, why he was talking to her, why he didn't tell anyone. She wanted to know if she was about to be punished, fired, written up, or used as an example. Ethan felt each question hit him like a reminder of what his silence had cost her. He shook his head and told her none of that was why he pulled her outside. He told her he didn't come to punish her. He came because she had opened his eyes in a way he hadn't expected. Her breath caught slightly at that, confusion mixing with disbelief as she stared at him like she wasn't sure she heard right. He explained that what she did outside wasn't a violation to him. It was the truth he had been missing for years. It was the kind of compassion he had forgotten to protect when he wrote rules that were meant to solve problems, not create pain. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He admitted straight out that he was responsible for the fear she felt now, for the rules that trapped her, for the stress pushing into her shoulders. She shook her head again, more slowly this time, and asked why he would ever show up like this, why he would watch his own employees without warning. Ethan didn't hide from the question. He told her he had suspected something was wrong in the system, but he didn't know how wrong until he watched her make that choice at the window. He told her he saw her tremble not from guilt, but from the fear of being caught doing the right thing, and that moment broke something inside him. Mia listened with her back against the wall, her eyes darting between him and the parking lot, as if she didn't know where to place her fear or her hope. She said the truth felt too big for her to hold all at once, that learning who he was made everything more confusing instead of clearer. Ethan stepped closer, but not enough to overwhelm her, and said he understood. He said that fear she felt wasn't her fault, it was his. Every moment of hesitation she had felt came from a system he had allowed to grow too strict, too cold, too detached from kindness. Before the story keeps going, take a moment and think about this crossroads he's standing in. Should he reveal everything now and protect her? Or will that make things explode in front of everyone? What would you do in his place, knowing someone's future is in your hands because of your own mistakes? Leave your thoughts in the comments, then come back. This moment changes everything that follows. Mia lowered her eyes for a moment, swallowing hard, and said she didn't know what to say to him. She didn't understand why he was thanking her instead of firing her. Ethan told her she had reminded him of something he had forgotten long ago, that rules aren't stronger than humanity. He said leaders often lose sight of everyday truth, and she had brought it back to him with one quiet act at the window. She blinked fast, her voice shaking as she said she wasn't brave. She was just tired of watching people feel small. Ethan answered gently that bravery doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks exactly like what she did, choosing compassion when no one is watching. She let out a slow breath that sounded almost like a release of something she had carried too long, but beneath it, there was still fear. She asked what would happen now, whether Rick would still check the cameras, whether her job was safe. Ethan knew he couldn't lie. He told her yes, Rick would check them, and yes, the footage would show the truth, but he added that she wouldn't face it alone. He promised he would step in before anything could happen to her. Mia stared at him as though the promise was too heavy to feel real. She wasn't sure she believed him, not because she doubted his intentions, but because the stakes felt too big for trust to hold on its own. Ethan didn't blame her. He wasn't sure how to fix everything yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. He couldn't walk back inside pretending to be a stranger anymore. He told her in a steady voice, that they would face whatever came next together, and that he would protect her from any consequences the system tried to place on her. She breathed out again, this time with a faint flicker of hope mixed into the fear. And as they stood there in the fading afternoon light, waiting for whatever Rick discovered, Ethan felt the story shift under their feet. The truth was out now. The next steps would decide more than just one job. They would reshape the foundation of an entire empire built on rules that had forgotten the people who lived under them. And with that, they turned toward the door, both knowing that the moment they stepped back inside, nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan held the door open for Mia as they stepped back into the diner, both carrying the weight of what had just been said outside. The air inside felt different now, thicker, as if the walls themselves knew something was about to shift. Rick was still in his office, probably replaying the footage and preparing whatever speech he gave when he caught someone breaking rules. Mia stayed close but slightly behind Ethan, her fingers brushing her apron as if searching for something steady to hold on to. Ethan paused near the counter, took a slow breath, and felt the moment begin to solidify around him. It was time to stop hiding, time to face the system he had created. He asked one of the servers to call Rick out front. The server blinked, surprised by the firm tone from a man who earlier ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, but she obeyed. Rick came out with the rigid walk of someone who expected confrontation and believed he had the upper hand. He looked at Mia first, eyes narrowing with that same cold suspicion, then at Ethan. Before he could start talking, Ethan spoke with a calm that cut across the tension like a clean line. He told Rick to come closer because they needed to clear something up. Rick's brows pulled together, and he muttered that he already knew what had happened and had the footage to prove it. He turned to Mia and began to say that taking food without permission was grounds for immediate discipline. Mia stiffened, but Ethan raised a hand, stopping Rick mid-sentence, and in that small pause, everything shifted. Ethan introduced himself, not with a dramatic gesture, not with a booming announcement, just his full name spoken quietly but clearly, the kind of clarity that doesn't need volume to carry power. Rick froze. His mouth dropped open slightly. The room seemed to tilt around him. He looked from Ethan's hoodie to his face, as if trying to reconcile the billionaire owner with the man standing in front of him, in worn jeans and a simple jacket. Mia watched too, but this time with worry threaded into hope, unsure where this moment would fall for her. Rick finally managed to ask if this was some kind of test or undercover inspection, but Ethan didn't let him spin the story into something corporate. He said he had come on his own without warning because he needed to see the truth beyond the charts and meetings. Rick started stammering, trying to defend the rules, claiming he enforced them exactly as instructed, that he followed the handbook perfectly. He said he never let anyone bend the policies because bending rules led to problems later. But Ethan didn't raise his voice. He simply asked Rick why the rule existed in the first place. Rick froze again, not expecting a question that simple. He said the rule was meant to prevent waste, prevent people from taking advantage, prevent confusion among staff. Ethan nodded but countered with a softer question. At what cost? Rick didn't answer. He looked at Mia again, seeing her differently now, realizing she had been caught doing something kind, not something harmful. Ethan explained that what Mia did outside wasn't breaking the spirit of the place, it was defending it. He spoke gently but firmly, telling Rick that compassion couldn't be treated as an offense. His words cut deeper because he wasn't angry. He was honest. He said the policy didn't fail because workers broke it. The policy failed because it didn't leave space for humanity. Rick swallowed hard, realizing the conversation wasn't about one box of fries. It was about the entire framework he believed kept the restaurant under control. Ethan saw the fear in Rick too, the fear of losing his standing, his job, his sense of order. So he softened his tone, saying this wasn't about punishing him either. It was about fixing something that had gone wrong long before this afternoon. In that moment, when Ethan said the rule itself was the problem and not the people following or breaking it, something quiet but powerful moved through the diner, almost like the tension itself exhaled. Mia looked at Ethan with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the idea that someone in his position would admit fault at this level. Rick lowered his head for a moment, realizing everything he thought he was protecting might have been built on fear, not fairness. Ethan told him calmly that the rule was gone. Right then, effective immediately. No more automatic punishment, no more threats hanging over the staff, no more cold interpretations of a policy that ignored basic human decency. Moments like these remind people listening that they aren't alone in wanting workplaces to feel humane, or in wishing leaders understood the weight of small acts of kindness. It creates a sense of shared hope, the kind that spreads between strangers who realize they've felt the same things in different places. As the words settled, Mia breathed out in a shaky rush, the kind of breath someone lets go only when the danger starts lifting. Rick looked up again, lost but relieved, because he understood he wouldn't be punished either, but he would need to unlearn the rigid way he'd been managing the place. Ethan told him they would talk more about training, expectations and support, but right now the priority was simple. No one would be fired today, not for kindness, not for trying to do right. Rick nodded, still shaken, still struggling to find words. He excused himself quietly, needing a moment to gather himself, leaving Ethan and Mia standing near the counter, the weight of the moment slowly turning into something lighter. Mia whispered that she didn't understand how everything changed so fast. Ethan smiled softly and said it changed because it had to, because watching her act from her heart forced him to act from his. She didn't reply right away, but her eyes glistened slightly with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Ethan placed one reassuring hand against the counter and told her this was only the beginning. The restaurant was just the first place that needed fixing. The policies across the entire company would have to change too. Mia stared at him, stunned again, as he said the old rules were done. Compassion would no longer be treated like a mistake, and with that promise hanging gently between them, the next dawn of change began to take shape, one that would stretch far beyond the walls of this small diner, reaching places neither of them could yet imagine. Ethan left the diner late that evening, with the promise to Mia still alive in his chest, a promise that stretched far beyond the small parking lot and the soft glow of the neon sign flickering above the door. By the next morning he was sitting in the corner office of the company headquarters, the same office where he had once approved every policy that now felt like a shadow over his conscience. Sunlight hit the long table in front of him as executives filed in, talking among themselves, unaware of how much the world was about to shift. Ethan watched them greet each other with tight smiles, the kind of smiles that came from habit rather than warmth. He saw how disconnected this room felt from the small diner, where kindness had almost cost a woman her job. That distance alone pushed him forward. He cleared his throat, waited for silence, and told them they were rewriting every policy related to waste and community support. Every single location across the country would begin offering free meals daily for those in need. The room fell silent in a way he hadn't heard before, not respectful, but startled. A few executives looked confused. A couple frowned and one shook his head slowly, already planning objections. They asked why such a change was being made without a long review, without cost estimates, without a committee. Ethan answered plainly. He said the company had lost its sense of humanity, that it was time to fix what they had broken. He didn't mention Mia by name, but he spoke of a waitress in a small town who still understood compassion better than the people running the business. He said she had shown him a truth he had forgotten, and that truth mattered more than numbers. The resistance arrived quickly. One executive insisted the cost would be too great. Another argued that they couldn't afford to change a system that had kept things under control for so many years. Ethan listened, but he didn't bend. He told them every business choice came with a price, and the price they had been paying until now was the hearts of their workers. Voices rose, papers rustled, and the tension in the room thickened. Ethan stayed steady. He repeated that this wasn't a proposal. It was a decision. He was undoing his own work because he finally understood the damage it had done. He reminded them that a leader could not expect loyalty without offering dignity, and that dignity came first. One executive asked whether this anonymous waitress would be rewarded or recognized, and Ethan answered no, not publicly. He wanted her act to stay her own, not turned into a corporate story or a marketing tool. The kindness had meaning because it asked for nothing back, and he intended to honor it that way. Some executives exchanged frustrated looks, but Ethan could see a few others soften, as if something inside them had been waiting for someone to say exactly what he was saying now. By the end of the meeting, the decision was final. There was no more debate. Ethan walked out with a strange mix of triumph and humility sitting side by side in his chest. Winning wasn't the satisfying part. Doing the right thing was. Hours later, he sat alone in his office reading emails from regional managers, some offering support, others questioning the sudden change. He prepared responses with patience, explaining the new guidelines clearly, explaining that every store would receive resources to manage the shift. His mind drifted back to the diner, to Mia standing by the window, trying to hide her fear, not knowing the impact she had already made. He imagined telling her everything he had done so far, imagined the look on her face when she learned the rule was gone everywhere, not just in her tiny corner of the world. Later that evening, when Ethan finally leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, he felt something settle inside him. Not peace exactly, but the sense that the decisions of today would echo deeper than he could see. Moments like these always return in ways no one expects, and the story he had set in motion was only beginning its reach. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, he prepared one last meeting before calling it a night. This time it was with the communications team. He told them to draft a memo to all locations explaining the new community meal policy, but he insisted on writing a personal message at the top. He wrote about compassion being the backbone of any real service. He wrote about remembering the human side of every rule. He wrote that the change came from a single act of kindness that opened his eyes. He didn't name Mia, but he knew the line was for her. When he finished, he sat back and let the weight of the moment sink in. The change was real now, carried out across hundreds of places, affecting thousands of workers and countless people in need. The victory didn't feel loud or showy. It felt steady, solid, and right. He closed his laptop and stepped out onto the balcony, watching the lights flicker on across the city. He wondered where Mia was at that exact moment, maybe finishing her shift, maybe walking home, maybe wondering if Rick had backed down or if he was still confused by the sudden change. Ethan knew her life would shift now too, not because of fame or reward, but because the world around her had finally bent toward the kindness she carried. He felt a quiet hope rise in him that she'd feel less alone, less afraid to follow her heart. And as he stood there with the noise of the city humming below, he knew he was preparing to return to that diner soon, to show her the impact of her courage with his own words. And somewhere deep inside he also knew that the story wasn't over yet, because the biggest shift wasn't the policy. It was what came next, when he stood in front of her again with the truth of just how far her kindness had traveled. Ethan drove back to the small town just as the sun began lowering behind the rooftops, turning the sky a soft orange that made everything look gentler than the world usually felt. The diner appeared at the curve in the road, the same way it had the first time he saw it, but the feeling in his chest was different now. Back then, he had walked in, holding doubts and heavy questions. Today he walked in carrying the start of something new, something that had begun with a quiet act at a window and had grown into a shift across his entire company. When he pushed open the door, the bell chimed in that familiar, tired way, and there she was, Mia wiping the counter, unaware he was standing there watching her with a kind of gratitude he didn't know how to fully express. She looked up, surprised but not frightened, and the relief on her face hit him harder than any meeting or speech he had given in the days since the change. Her smile trembled a little as she greeted him, the kind of tremble that comes when someone has been holding their breath for too long and is finally allowed to exhale. He walked up to the counter and told her he'd come to talk, not about policies or managers or anything heavy, but about what her choice had set in motion. She blinked slowly, unsure where he was going, and he told her that the new rule was already live everywhere, in every town. Every diner under the company's name would now offer meals to those who needed them. She gasped, a hand flying to her chest, and asked if he really meant everywhere. He nodded. She leaned back a little, stunned, trying to absorb the weight of something so big being tied to a moment she thought had been so small. Her eyes softened with disbelief, and she whispered that she never expected anything to change. She said she wasn't trying to start anything, that she just wanted the man outside to feel human again. Ethan listened as her voice shook in the quiet part of the diner, letting every word land inside him, letting the truth of who she was show one more layer. She said again that she didn't do anything special, that anyone with a heart would have done the same. Ethan shook his head gently, telling her that wasn't true, that many people care but not many act. Many see pain but turn away. Many know what's right, but let fear keep them still. He said her kindness had broken through a wall he had built without thinking, and that wall had begun falling because she decided a person outside the window deserved warmth more than she deserved safety from a rule. Mia lowered her gaze, her cheeks warming as she tried to hide the emotion rising in her eyes. She said she wasn't trying to be a hero. She wasn't looking for attention. She simply couldn't watch someone collapse under the weight of being invisible. Ethan nodded, saying softly that this was exactly why her action mattered, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Her hands trembled, and she pressed them flat against the counter to steady herself. The pulse in her throat beat fast, like her heart was trying to keep up with everything she had just heard. For a long moment, the two stood there without speaking. The afternoon light filtered through the front window, landing on the spot where she had slipped outside days before to give a man in need a small box of fries. It made the moment feel like a memory and a turning point at the same time. Ethan finally told her he wanted her to know that the company's change wasn't based on research or numbers or pressure. It was based on her. He said she had given him something he didn't know he had lost: perspective, and she had done it without expecting anything back. That truth made her eyes well up, though she didn't let the tears fall. She laughed a little, embarrassed, and apologized for getting emotional, but Ethan said she didn't need to apologize for anything. Her emotion wasn't weakness, it was proof of why the new direction mattered. She looked up at him again, her voice softer than before, asking why he chose to tell her all this personally instead of sending a message or letting someone else speak on his behalf. Ethan answered simply that some conversations needed to be face-to-face, some gratitude needed a real voice, some truths needed to be carried by the person who felt them, not passed down through screens and signatures. As the two spoke, the door opened briefly for a few customers settling in for dinner, sending in a small gust of air that fluttered the napkins on the counter. Mia stepped aside to help them, still processing what she had learned. Ethan watched her move with a new lightness in her steps, as if the burden she had been carrying for years was finally lifting. Her smile held sincerity instead of strain, and the relief in her shoulders was visible even from across the room. When she returned to him, she said quietly that she hoped the changes would help people feel welcome, even those who walked through life with nothing but a wish for warmth. Ethan told her he hoped the same, and that the new rule would be just the start. He admitted he couldn't fix everything overnight, but he was going to try to rebuild the company from the inside out, using her kindness as the foundation. She stared at him with a mixture of awe and grounding strength, the kind that came from someone who didn't let praise tilt her. She said again that she didn't feel like she deserved credit for anything. She had just done what felt right. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice as he said that doing what felt right in a world that punishes compassion was rare, that her courage had become a light in a place that had forgotten how to look for one. Her breath tightened, and she asked quietly what would happen next. Ethan told her the company would be reshaped, yes, but he also planned to visit other locations, speak to staff, understand their struggles, and make sure no one else had to choose between kindness and safety. Mia smiled at that, a small but genuine curve that made her eyes shine. She said she hoped the man she helped outside that day was doing better. Ethan said he hoped so too, and that maybe someday he'd come back to the diner and see that kindness wasn't rare anymore. Mia leaned against the counter, the room warm around them, the moment settling like a soft blanket over a long winter night. She looked at him with gratitude, but also with something deeper: trust, the kind that didn't come fast or easy. She thanked him again, not for changing the company, but for listening, for hearing her voice when she thought no one in power ever would. Ethan felt something shift inside him again, something gentle and solid, as if the transformation he began wasn't about rules at all. It was about learning how to see people again, starting with her. And as they stood there in the fading light, the scent of warm food drifting through the room and the quiet buzz of customers filling the space, Ethan realized how close they were to the end of this journey. Only one more step remained, one last moment before everything settled into its new shape, one final breath before the resolution they both needed came to meet them. Ethan returned to the little diner on a bright morning a few weeks later, the kind of morning that carried a gentler air, as if the world had quietly softened around the edges. The town looked the same, the road curving in the same slow way, the neon sign humming faintly above the door. But something in the atmosphere felt different, almost like the place itself had taken a deep breath after years of holding it in. He parked a short distance away, choosing not to step out right away. He wanted to watch, just for a moment, to see the change without interrupting it. And there it was. What had once been a plain side window now held a small counter with a warm sign hanging above it, letting everyone know that a free meal was waiting for anyone who needed one. No questions, no judgment, no fear. People were lined up already, quiet but hopeful, holding their bags, their blankets, their tired stories. The morning sun lit each face with a softness that felt almost sacred. Mia stood behind the counter, moving with calm purpose as she greeted each person with a smile that didn't look forced or guarded anymore. Her shoulders rested naturally now, no tension pulling them tight, no fear lurking behind her eyes. She handed out plates one by one, listening when someone wanted to talk, nodding when someone only needed silence. For a moment, Ethan simply watched her, feeling something warm gather in his chest. It was one thing to make a rule change in a boardroom. It was another to see the result living and breathing in real time. Each smile she gave was a small act of restoration. Each plate, a quiet declaration that nobody had to feel invisible in this place again. When Mia finally noticed him standing by the edge of the parking lot, her eyes widened with surprise, then softened with something like recognition that carried deeper than before. She excused herself gently from the counter and walked toward him, wiping her hands on her apron, though her face held none of the nervousness she had once carried. She stopped in front of him with a smile full of humble pride, the kind that comes when a person sees a dream they never dared to dream actually happening. Ethan asked how things were going, and her answer came with a bright breath she didn't hide. She said it had been busy, beautiful, and sometimes emotional, but good. So good she could hardly put it into words. She talked about how regular customers had started pitching in, donating ingredients, helping clean, even preparing little care bags for the people who came by. It had become a community effort, one that grew from the ground up. Ethan listened, taking in every detail, letting her voice paint the new world that had risen from her small act. She told him how Rick had changed too. He was softer now, less rigid, more willing to listen. She said she had seen him talk to people at the counter, asking their names, offering small jokes that made the space lighter. It was as if removing the fear from his shoulders had made room for kindness he didn't know how to show before. Hearing that made Ethan smile, because it proved the change wasn't just structural, it was human. She then looked toward the counter again, watching an older man walk away with a meal held carefully in his hands, and she whispered that sometimes she still couldn't believe any of this was real. Ethan replied that everything real starts small, often with one moment, one choice. She turned back to him with tears she fought but didn't hide, her voice soft as she said she only did what felt right. He reminded her that doing what feels right, especially when rules say not to, takes courage. Courage that sparks change, courage that outlives the moment. She let his words settle, closing her eyes briefly as the wind brushed between them. When she opened them again, her gaze was clearer, more certain. She thanked him, not as a boss or someone in power, but as a person. She thanked him for seeing her, for listening, for choosing compassion the way she had chosen it that day by the window. Ethan felt something shift inside him again, a final click that completed the transformation he had begun. He told her that if anyone deserved thanks, it was her, that the company had changed because she reminded him what leadership really meant. He said he wasn't here to take credit. He was here because he wanted her to know the truth. Kindness had scaled because of her. Not because of money, not because of position, because of her heart. The two stood there watching the flow of people receiving meals, each one leaving a little lighter than they came. The scene looked almost like a quiet celebration of everyday goodness, like a living mural painted by hands that had once been afraid to reach out. A breeze carried the smell of warm food across the lot, mixing with the soft sounds of conversation and the gentle footsteps of people finally treated with dignity. Ethan glanced at Mia, seeing how she belonged here in a way rules could never measure. She returned to the counter to serve someone new, but before walking away, she turned back one last time and smiled at him, an unspoken promise that kindness wouldn't fade here again. He nodded, stepping back, letting her shine in the space she helped transform. As he watched her work, he felt a quiet truth settle deep inside him. This was the legacy he wanted, not the buildings or the earnings or the charts. This small act that grew into a movement of dignity, this proof that one person doing the right thing could shake an entire empire awake. And as the morning carried on, with plates passed, hands warmed, and hearts lifted, Ethan knew the story wasn't a grand tale of business at all. It was the story of a waitress who refused to let rules silence her humanity, and a man who finally learned to follow her lead. Before you go, let me ask you something from the heart of this ending. When you think about Mia's courage, what part of her choice speaks to you the most? What would you have done in her place? If this ending made you reflect on compassion, fear, or the weight of small gestures, pause for a moment and share it. Your voice adds to the circle of people touched by this story, and someone out there might feel less alone reading your words. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If you reach this point, comment your first and last name so I know you are here with us. Leave a like if this story warmed something inside you, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach you. And when you're ready for the next one, click on the next video. If this tale touched you because of the power of a single act, the next will shake you even deeper with a choice that changes an entire family's destiny.